You found your way here and clicked on this video. Thank you. Welcome to Sleepy Time Design, the home of gentle design trivia to go to sleep to. This is a quiet place for slowing down at the end of the day. You may let the sound play and rest as you are, without expectation, without worry. You may gently listen with peace, knowing that you are about to sink and relax into this subtle, sleepy story. The emergence of clarity in the quietness of the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, something crystallized in the world of graphic design. Something that had been gathering momentum for decades, whispered in the halls of design schools and printed in the clean pages of European magazines, finally coalesced into a distinct movement. It emerged not with fanfare, but with precision, drawing from the rigorous lines of Swiss design and the philosophical foundations laid by the Bauhaus decades earlier. These were not new ideas exactly, but rather ideas whose time had fully arrived, whose clarity had become undeniable. The movement carried with it a phrase, simple and profound, 3 words that would echo through studios and classrooms for generations. Less is more. Attributed to the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, these words became more than a catchphrase. They became a mantra, a philosophy, a way of seeing and thinking that would reshape the visual landscape. The phrase itself embodied its own principle, economical, direct, impossible to misunderstand. In its brevity, lived its truth. At its heart, this minimalist approach prioritizes functionality over decoration, a revolutionary stance in a world still cluttered with ornamental excess. Every element exists with purpose, intentional and clear. Nothing superfluous remains on the page, on the screen, in the composition. Each line, each shape, each letter form must justify its presence or face elimination. This isn't cruelty but clarity, not emptiness but essence. White space breathes through these compositions like air through open windows. Negative space, some call it, though the term suggests absence when really it's a presence all its own. This space gives designs room to exist, to speak without shouting, to communicate with quiet authority. The eye finds rest in these open areas, naturally drawn to what matters most. Where earlier design might fill every corner, minimalism understood that emptiness could be as powerful as form. That silence between notes makes the music. Color palettes narrow in this aesthetic, distilling down to 2 or 3 hues at most. Sometimes even less monochrome compositions, where a single color and its variations tell the entire story. This limitation isn't poverty but richness. Each color allowed to speak fully, to establish its character without competition. Black and white becomes not a default, but a choice, deliberate and powerful. When color appears, it arrives with purpose, with meaning, each hue considered and placed. Sans-serif typefaces rise to prominence during this era, their clean letter forms stripped of the ornamental serifs that had decorated text for centuries. The serifs fall away like unnecessary clothing, revealing the essential structure of each letter. These typefaces appear honest in their simplicity, straightforward, refusing to dress up the message. They don't seduce with elegance so much as convince with clarity. Among these typefaces, Helvetica stands especially tall. Created in 1957 by Max Miedinger in Switzerland, it becomes perhaps the most iconic face in the minimalist movement. Its letter forms achieve a kind of neutrality, a transparency that allows content to speak without the typeface calling attention to itself. The design is so ubiquitous, it becomes invisible, present everywhere, from subway signs to corporate logos, from book covers to street signs. Helvetica becomes the voice of minimalism, clear and unaccented, speaking every message with the same calm authority. Grid systems provide the underlying structure for these compositions, mathematical and precise, organizing space with invisible architecture. These grids don't typically show in the final work, but their influence structures everything where text aligns, how images relate to margins, the rhythm of elements down the page. The grid brings order without rigidity, consistency without monotony. Designers work within these constraints and find freedom, discovering that limitations can liberate rather than restrict. The international typographic style, known also as Swiss style, influences everything, with its emphasis on cleanliness and readability. Born in Switzerland in the 1950 seconds, this approach values objective communication over personal expression. Information should be clear, hierarchies should be obvious, and the designer's ego should step aside to let the content shine. These Swiss designers weren't removing beauty but redefining it, finding aesthetic pleasure in clarity and precision rather than decoration and embellishment. Ornament falls away in this movement like leaves in autumn. Excessive decoration disappears from layouts, from typefaces, from every surface. The Victorian love of embellishment, the Art Nouveau's organic curves, the decorative impulses that had characterized design for so long, all of it recedes. What remains isn't barren but essential. Only what serves the purpose stays. Only what communicates clearly survives. The result feels clean, purposeful, honest. The visual language simplifies to its fundamental vocabulary, and in that simplification, a new kind of sophistication emerges, not the sophistication of complexity, but of refinement, not of abundance, but of precision. The designers working in this mode understood something fundamental about visual communication. They recognized that the human eye and mind can only process so much information at once, that clarity often requires subtraction rather than addition. In a world growing increasingly complex, increasingly noisy with competing messages and visual stimuli, minimalism offered a kind of sanctuary. The white space in these designs became restful, contemplative. The limited color palettes felt coherent rather than restrictive. The clean typography invited reading rather than demanding attention through decorative gymnastics. This approach represented a kind of visual honesty, a rejection of artifice for its own sake. Where earlier design movements might use decoration to impress, to demonstrate skill or wealth, minimalism stripped away these pretenses. The designs don't apologize for their simplicity. They don't dress themselves up to seem more important than they are. Instead, they present information, ideas, and messages with straightforward clarity, trusting that good content doesn't need elaborate packaging to be valuable. The integrity of this approach resonates through every element: the choice of typeface, the width of margins, the amount of white space, the selection of colors. Each decision reflects a commitment to purpose over decoration, to function over form for form's sake alone, to communication over mere visual interest. Eastern influence and digital evolution. From the East comes influence, quiet and profound. Japanese aesthetic principles seep into Western consciousness during these decades, arriving not with force, but with the gentle insistence of water finding its path. Two concepts in particular resonate deeply with the minimalist sensibility emerging in graphic design: ma and kanso. Ma refers to the space between things, the interval, the pause, a concept that recognizes negative space not as emptiness, but as an active element in composition. It's the silence between words that gives words meaning, the space between objects that allows each object to be fully seen. Kanso speaks to simplicity itself, to the elimination of clutter, to the beauty found in plainness and restraint. These weren't merely aesthetic preferences, but philosophical positions, ways of understanding the relationship between presence and absence, between doing and not doing. These Eastern ideas merge with modernist thinking in the West, creating something that feels both new and ancient. The cross-pollination happens through books, through traveling designers, through exhibitions and cultural exchange. Japanese designers studying in Europe bring back Western ideas. European designers discovering Japanese art and philosophy find echoes of their own modernist impulses. The resulting synthesis enriches both traditions, each one deepening the other's understanding of simplicity, space, and visual restraint. Flat design emerges in the contemporary era as a digital expression of these minimalist principles, championed by companies like Apple and Microsoft in their operating systems and digital interfaces. This approach renders everything on glowing screens without dimensional illusion, without shadows or gradients that suggest depth. Elements appear honest about their two-dimensional nature, refusing to pretend they're physical buttons or textured surfaces. The flatness isn't about limitation, but about embracing the nature of the digital medium, about creating visual languages appropriate to screens, rather than importing metaphors from the physical world. Logos simplify during this period into geometric shapes that feel almost primitive in their directness: circles, squares, triangles. These basic forms carry meaning through their very simplicity, through their archetypal quality. A circle suggests wholeness, continuity, unity. A triangle implies direction, movement, hierarchy. A square speaks to stability, balance, equality. Designers working in the minimalist mode understand that these fundamental shapes communicate on a level beneath conscious thought, tapping into visual languages that feel universal rather than cultural. Forms reduce to their most basic expressions throughout minimalist work. A bird becomes a few curved lines suggesting wings and body. A house becomes a square with a triangular roof. A person becomes a circle atop a simple body shape. The eye recognizes these reduced forms instantly, filling in the details from memory and experience. This reduction isn't about making things childish or simplistic, but about distilling complex forms to their recognizable essence, about communicating with maximum efficiency and minimum visual noise. Asymmetrical balance creates visual interest without adding complexity to these compositions. Rather than centering everything or creating perfect mirror images, designers place elements off-center, creating dynamic equilibrium through careful weight distribution. A large element on one side balances against several smaller elements on the other. A dense area of text finds counterbalance in an expanse of white space. This asymmetry feels more organic than rigid symmetry, more interesting to the eye, more alive. It's a delicate dance of weight and counterweight across the page or screen, elements in conversation with each other and with the edges of the composition. High contrast ensures clarity in minimalist work: dark against light, light against dark, each element clearly distinguished from its surroundings. With fewer elements present, each one must be immediately legible, instantly comprehensible. The contrast doesn't shout, but speaks clearly, establishing hierarchies and relationships without ambiguity. Black text on white background, white text on black background, a single color against neutral gray, these high-contrast relationships make information accessible, make navigation intuitive, make communication direct. The Bauhaus School, existing from 1919 to 1933 inches Germany, laid these foundational principles decades before minimalism fully crystallized as a movement. Walter Gropius founded the school with a vision of uniting art and craft, of bringing together fine arts and applied arts under one roof and one philosophy. The school emphasized function and simplicity above all else, teaching that form should follow function, that decoration applied without purpose was dishonest. Teachers like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Joseph Albers, and Wassily Kandinsky explored the relationships between color, shape, and space, developing principles that would influence designers for generations. Though the Nazis closed the Bauhaus in 1933, its faculty scattered across the world, bringing its teachings to new contexts, new countries, new generations of students. In mid-20th century Switzerland, Josef Müller-Brockmann creates posters that become touchstones of the minimalist movement, works studied and referenced decades after their creation. Each poster represents a study in restraint, in the power of reduction to amplify rather than diminish impact. His poster for a Beethoven concert uses only typography and geometric shapes, yet it seems to vibrate with musical energy. His safety posters communicate urgent messages with stark imagery and minimal text, proving that fewer elements can sometimes communicate more powerfully than elaborate illustrations. These minimalist designs improve how information travels from page to mind, from screen to understanding. They reduce cognitive load, that mental effort required to process and comprehend information. When a design contains only essential elements, when hierarchy is clear, when the path through information is obvious, the viewer's brain works less and understands more. This efficiency isn't about dumbing down, but about respecting the viewer's time and attention, about removing obstacles between message and comprehension. Corporate identity systems adopt these minimalist principles enthusiastically, recognizing that simple, clear designs ensure consistency and create recognizability that spans continents and applications. A logo that works in one color works everywhere. Typography that remains legible at any size serves every purpose. A limited color palette reproduces accurately across different printing processes and different screens. These practical advantages align perfectly with aesthetic preferences, making minimalism not just beautiful but functional, not just stylish but pragmatic. The systems scale up and down, work in color and black and white, translate across cultures and languages, maintaining their integrity and recognizability regardless of context or application. The digital age arrives. The digital age arrives with its screens of every size, from enormous desktop monitors to tablets held in two hands, to phones slipped into pockets. Minimalism finds new relevance in these constrained spaces, necessity even, where usability becomes paramount and every pixel matters. The principles developed for print translate remarkably well to digital contexts, perhaps even more effectively than ornate styles that clutter small screens and slow loading times. What worked on paper works on glass, and the reasons become more compelling with each new device, each new screen size that designers must accommodate. Apple's design philosophy, guided for years by Jony Ive, becomes synonymous with minimalism during this era, influencing product design and graphic design in equal measure. The company's approach extends from the physical form of devices, smooth surfaces, minimal buttons, clean lines, to the interfaces displayed on their screens. Icons simplify to essential forms. Menus reduce to necessary options. Every pixel serves a purpose. Every element justifies its presence. This consistency between hardware and software, between object and interface, creates a unified aesthetic that shapes consumer expectations and industry standards for years. Packaging simplifies in this climate, brands discovering that restraint conveys sophistication more effectively than elaborate decoration. A plain white box with a single logo speaks luxury. Minimal text on recyclable cardboard suggests environmental consciousness and honesty about product quality. The package doesn't try to convince through design pyrotechnics, because the product inside presumably speaks for itself. This restraint extends to typeface choices, to color selections, to the amount of information presented on surfaces. What once might have been covered in marketing copy and visual flourishes now breathes with white space and selective communication. The content-first approach takes hold as a guiding principle in this minimalist landscape. The message matters most. Everything else serves it. Design becomes a vehicle for content rather than a spectacle in its own right. This philosophy particularly influences web design, where the hierarchy of information determines layout rather than layout determining how information gets presented. The user comes to find content, to accomplish tasks, to discover information. The design facilitates these goals rather than getting in the way with unnecessary visual complexity. Monochromatic color schemes appear frequently in minimalist work, variations on a single hue creating subtle depth without the chaos of competing colors. A design might exist entirely in shades of blue, from pale sky to deep navy, or in a range of warm grays from almost white to charcoal. These limited palettes feel cohesive, sophisticated, intentional. They avoid the visual confusion that can result from too many color relationships competing for attention. The eye moves smoothly through the composition, understanding relationships through value and saturation rather than hue contrast. Typography scales up dramatically in minimalist design, large letter forms becoming both text and visual elements simultaneously. A single word fills a page, impossible to miss, commanding attention through sheer presence rather than decorative treatment. Headline typography grows bold and large, creating visual impact without illustration, without photography, without any element other than the letters themselves. This approach trusts typography to carry both informational and aesthetic weight, to function as communication and as image at once. Some designers employ mathematical systems in their minimalist work, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, seeking harmonious proportions that feel right even when viewers can't articulate why. These ratios appear in nature, in classical architecture, in Renaissance paintings. Their application to graphic design brings a sense of natural order, of rightness, that exists beneath conscious perception. The relationship between a large element and a small element, between text size and margin width, between image and white space, these proportions can follow mathematical principles that have pleased the human eye for millennia. Scandinavian design traditions contribute significantly to minimalist graphic aesthetic, bringing sensibilities shaped by northern landscapes and long winters. The clarity of Nordic light, the spaciousness of northern terrain, the cultural values of functionality and democracy, all of these influences flow into Scandinavian design's particular flavor of minimalism. It's a warmth within restraint, a humanity within simplicity. The designs feel accessible rather than cold, welcoming rather than austere. Color appears but judiciously. Wood textures and natural materials find their way into palettes and patterns. The result is minimalism that feels livable, approachable, human-scaled. The philosophy of minimalism clarifies itself through practice and articulation. This isn't about removing everything, but about removing everything unnecessary. The distinction matters enormously. Removing everything creates emptiness, absence, void. Removing everything unnecessary creates clarity, purpose, essence. What remains after this process of elimination isn't less but more impactful, more communicative, more honest. Each element that survives the editing process carries more weight, receives more attention, communicates more effectively than it could in a crowded composition. Photography in minimalist contexts becomes especially deliberate, favoring simple compositions with clear subjects and no clutter to confuse the eye or dilute the message. A single object against a plain background. A portrait with minimal props or environmental detail. A landscape reduced to essential forms, horizon line, sky, land. These photographs don't attempt to capture everything visible, but rather to isolate what matters most, to frame the subject in a way that eliminates distraction. The camera work often feels straightforward rather than artistic, though, of course, tremendous skill and intention goes into achieving this apparent simplicity. In 2014, Google introduces material design, a design language that weaves minimalist principles with subtle depth and motion, creating a new chapter in the evolution of digital aesthetics. Unlike the completely flat design that preceded it, material design adds gentle shadows that suggest layering, animations that indicate causality and spatial relationships. It maintains minimalism's essential characteristics: clean typography, generous white space, limited color palettes, while adding just enough dimensional cue to help users understand interface hierarchies and relationships. The motion design feels purposeful rather than decorative, each animation explaining something about how the interface works, how elements relate to each other, how actions cause reactions. The convergence of these developments, digital constraints, corporate adoption, mathematical systems, cultural influences, creates a moment where minimalism becomes not just an aesthetic choice, but a practical necessity. The approach serves multiple masters simultaneously: user experience, brand identity, technical performance, cross-cultural communication. What began as an artistic movement evolved into a comprehensive design philosophy applicable to virtually every visual challenge the digital age presents. The principles prove robust enough to guide everything from a business card to a global operating system, from a poster to an entire corporate identity, simplifying the interface. Web design embraces single-column layouts during this period, responding gracefully to the reality of mobile screens and the endless variety of devices accessing the internet. The single column eliminates complexity, ensures readability regardless of screen width, and creates a natural top-to-bottom flow that mirrors how people scroll through content on phones and tablets. Information stacks vertically, one section following another in clear sequence. The layout adapts fluidly rather than breaking awkwardly, maintaining its integrity whether viewed on a tiny phone screen or a massive desktop monitor. This approach represents a fundamental shift from the multi-column print layouts that dominated earlier web design, acknowledging that digital content behaves differently than printed pages. Shadows disappear from this aesthetic. Gradients fade away. Textures vanish entirely. Flat design, in its purest form, asserting itself across digital interfaces. Elements exist on a single plane without the dimensional illusions that characterized earlier digital design. Buttons no longer appear to rise from the surface. Cards don't cast shadows suggesting physical depth. Everything exists, honestly, in two dimensions, acknowledging the flat reality of screens rather than creating elaborate metaphors borrowed from the physical world. This flattening simplifies visual processing, reduces file sizes, improves performance, and creates a cleaner overall aesthetic. Infographics simplify dramatically in minimalist hands, using basic icons and limited data points to convey complex information with crystal clarity. Rather than overwhelming viewers with every possible statistic, minimalist infographics select the most important numbers, the most telling comparisons, the clearest ways to visualize relationships. A single well-designed chart communicates more effectively than a dozen cluttered graphs. Icons reduce concepts to simple pictograms that transcend language barriers. Color coding creates immediate understanding of categories and relationships. The goal isn't to display all available data, but to illuminate the most important insights within that data. The international style of architecture casts its long influence across disciplines, its principles of simplicity and function finding natural expression in graphic design. The glass and steel towers of Mies van der Rohe and the clean concrete forms of Le Corbusier spoke the same visual language that graphic designers were developing on paper and screen. Both disciplines rejected ornament, embraced geometric purity, prioritized function, and sought universal rather than regional or historically referenced aesthetics. The architectural influence reminds graphic designers that minimalism isn't merely a visual style, but a philosophical position about how design should serve human needs. Business cards shrink their content during this minimalist wave, generous white space surrounding minimal contact information. A name, perhaps a title, a phone number or email address, nothing more clutters these small rectangles. The cards become more memorable precisely because they contain less, their simplicity standing out in wallets full of busy, text-heavy alternatives. Sometimes the paper quality speaks louder than any printed information, the texture and weight conveying professionalism and attention to detail. The restraint suggests confidence the person doesn't need to explain or convince. The minimal information provided is sufficient for those who need to make contact. Digital interfaces adopt the one message per screen principle, a guideline that improves focus and comprehension by eliminating competing demands for attention. Each screen serves a single primary purpose, presents one key piece of information, or asks for one specific input. Rather than cramming multiple functions and messages into a single view, minimalist interface design breaks tasks into clear steps, each one simple and focused. This approach reduces cognitive load, decreases errors, and makes complex processes feel manageable. Users always know what to focus on because only one thing demands their attention at any given moment. Editorial design in the minimalist mode uses ample margins and generous leading the space between lines of text to improve readability and create a sense of calm on the page. The text breathes, surrounded by white space that prevents the eye from feeling crowded or overwhelmed. Line length stays moderate, neither too wide to track easily, nor too narrow to read comfortably. Paragraph spacing provides clear breaks without requiring indentation. The overall effect feels spacious, unrushed, inviting sustained reading rather than quick scanning. Books and magazines designed this way treat text as something to be savored rather than consumed frantically. The de Stijl movement, with artists like Piet Mondrian, creating geometric abstractions using primary colors and black lines, continues to influence minimalist design decades after the movement's peak in the 1920 seconds. Mondrian's paintings reduce visual elements to horizontal and vertical lines, to rectangles of primary colors balanced against white space. These compositions feel both rigorous and dynamic, mathematical yet alive. Graphic designers working in minimalist modes often reference this vocabulary: the grid of lines, the blocks of primary color, the careful balance of filled and empty space. The influence connects contemporary minimalism to early modernist explorations of pure form and color. This minimalist aesthetic stands in stark contrast to Victorian-era ornament and maximalist excess, representing not just a different style, but a fundamentally different philosophy about design's purpose and methods. Where Victorian design celebrated abundance, decoration, and display of craft skill through elaborate ornamentation, minimalism celebrates restraint, clarity, and respect for the viewer's attention. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One approach fills every surface with pattern and detail. The other empties surfaces to reveal essential structure. Neither is inherently superior, but they serve different purposes and reflect different values about communication, beauty, and the designer's role. A single focal point commands attention in minimalist compositions, the eye drawn immediately and inevitably to the one element that matters most. This might be a large typographic headline, a striking photograph, a bold geometric shape, or a single word in color while everything else remains neutral. The surrounding emptiness amplifies this focal point's power, ensuring nothing competes for attention or dilutes impact. The technique requires careful judgment, choosing what deserves this prominence, positioning it for maximum effect, supporting it with appropriate negative space. When executed well, the single focal point creates compositions that communicate instantly and memorably. Modular systems develop within minimalist practice, creating sets of elements that can be combined in various configurations while maintaining visual coherence. A limited palette of colors, a small collection of geometric shapes, a few carefully chosen typefaces, these building blocks recombine to create diverse layouts that nonetheless feel related, part of the same family. The system provides consistency without monotony, allowing variation within clear boundaries. Corporate identity programs particularly benefit from this approach, using modular systems to maintain brand consistency across countless applications while allowing flexibility to address different needs and contexts. The modules function like a visual language with a defined vocabulary and grammar, capable of expressing many different messages while maintaining a consistent voice. The challenge of less. The challenge of minimalism reveals itself to practitioners willing to engage deeply with the work, creating with less demands, more thought, more precision, more careful consideration than creating with abundance. When a designer has unlimited elements at their disposal, fonts, colors, images, textures, effects, mistakes can hide in the complexity. Weaknesses can be masked by decoration. But in minimalism, every element stands exposed. A poorly chosen typeface becomes glaringly obvious when it's the only typeface. An awkward composition can't be rescued by adding more elements. The spacing between two elements becomes critically important when those are the only two elements on the page. This nakedness, this exposure, requires designers to refine their fundamental skills, to understand proportion and balance and hierarchy at the deepest level. The work appears simple, but achieving that simplicity demands mastery. The modernist movement of the early 20th century prepared the ground for minimalism to flourish decades later, establishing philosophical foundations and visual vocabularies that minimalist designers would later build upon. Modernism rejected historical styles and ornamental traditions, seeking instead to create new forms appropriate to the modern age of industry, technology, and mass production. The movement valued honesty in materials, clarity in communication, and forms that arose from function rather than from applied decoration. These ideas percolated through art schools, architecture studios, and design practices for decades before crystallizing into the minimalist movement. Without modernism's groundwork, minimalism might never have found such fertile soil in which to grow. Minimalist designs age gracefully in ways that more elaborate designs often do not. Trendy decorative elements drop shadows, glossy highlights, specific illustration styles. Fashionable color combinations quickly become dated, marking a design as belonging to a specific era. But minimalist work, by avoiding these trendy embellishments, maintains relevance across years and even decades. A minimalist poster from the 1960 seconds can still feel contemporary today because its essential elements, typography, geometric forms, limited color, remain powerful regardless of changing fashions. This longevity makes minimalism particularly valuable for corporate identities and other designs intended to endure, to represent organizations and ideas across many years without requiring constant updating. Form follows function. The phrase coined by architect Louis Sullivan in the late 19th century becomes gospel in minimalist graphic design practice. The idea suggests that the shape of something, whether a building or a poster, should arise naturally from its purpose, rather than being imposed from outside based on aesthetic preferences or historical styles. A minimalist design begins with understanding what needs to be communicated, what action needs to be facilitated, what information needs to be conveyed. The visual form then develops to serve these functions as efficiently and clearly as possible. Decoration that doesn't support function gets eliminated. Elements that don't serve the purpose find no place in the composition. The result is work that feels inevitable, as if it couldn't possibly be any other way. Color blocking emerges as a technique in minimalist work, using solid areas of color to create visual interest without resorting to patterns or complex textures. A page might divide into 2 or 3 sections, each filled with a different solid color, with text and images placed within these color fields. The technique creates structure, establishes hierarchy, guides the eye through the composition all through the simplest possible means. The color blocks might be geometric and precise, or organic and flowing, but they remain flat, solid, unadorned. This approach works particularly well in digital contexts where gradients and textures can slow loading times and create technical complications, but solid colors render quickly and cleanly across all devices. In 1950 seconds, New York, designers like Paul Rand contribute significantly to American minimalism, developing a visual language that communicates clearly across cultural boundaries while maintaining aesthetic sophistication. Rand's work for IBM, ABC, and other major corporations demonstrates how minimalist principles can serve commerce without sacrificing intelligence or creativity. His designs strip away unnecessary elements while retaining wit, personality, and memorable visual impact. The work proves that minimalism need not be cold or impersonal, that restraint and warmth can coexist, that simple forms can convey complex ideas and emotions. His influence spreads through his teaching, his writing, and his example, shaping how generations of American designers understand the relationship between form and content. Packaging design during the minimalist era increasingly chooses recyclable materials and simple printing techniques, aligning aesthetic choices with sustainability values. A brown cardboard box with a single color printed label uses fewer resources than elaborate multicolor packaging with laminated surfaces and complex construction. The simplicity that appeals aesthetically also reduces environmental impact. This alignment of ethical and aesthetic considerations strengthens minimalism's appeal, suggesting that what looks good and what does good can be the same thing. Brands adopting this approach signal their values through design choices, communicating environmental consciousness without needing to state it explicitly in words. Responsive web design makes minimalism not just aesthetically pleasing, but practically necessary in the contemporary digital landscape. Websites must function across an enormous range of screen sizes, from small phones to large desktop monitors, maintaining usability and readability in all contexts. Complex layouts with many elements often break awkwardly when scaled to different sizes, but minimalist designs with few elements and simple structure adapt gracefully. A single column layout works on any screen width. Large typography remains legible, whether reduced or enlarged. Generous white space cushions elements at any size. The practical demands of responsive design thus reinforce aesthetic preferences for simplicity and restraint. Minimalist poster design often features a single powerful image or typographic treatment, nothing more needed to convey the message. A photograph fills the frame, a headline in bold type, perhaps a date and location in small text. The poster accomplishes its purpose through this economy of means. The single image must work harder, chosen carefully for its ability to communicate clearly and compellingly. The typography must balance with the image, complement it without competing. These posters stand out on cluttered walls and bulletin boards precisely because they contain less than everything around them, their simplicity creating breathing room that draws the eye. Elements align along invisible grid lines in minimalist compositions, creating order that feels natural rather than imposed. The viewer doesn't consciously notice the grid, but experiences its effects, the sense that everything relates properly, that spacing feels consistent, that the composition holds together as a unified whole. Text aligns with image edges. Margins maintain consistent widths. Elements space themselves at regular intervals. This underlying structure, though invisible in the final work, does the crucial work of organizing space and creating visual harmony. The grid serves as the skeleton that gives the composition its form and stability, even when that skeleton remains hidden beneath the surface. The cumulative effect of these various developments, the challenge that refines skills, the historical precedents that provide foundation, the practical advantages that align with aesthetic preferences creates a design approach that feels simultaneously principled and pragmatic. Minimalism emerges not as arbitrary style, but as a logical response to specific challenges and opportunities, a way of working that serves multiple goals at once. The approach proves robust enough to guide work across vastly different contexts and applications, flexible enough to allow individual expression within its constraints, and enduring enough to remain relevant across decades of technological and cultural change. Philosophy and practice. Annual reports adopt clean, minimalist layouts during this era, making complex financial information accessible rather than overwhelming to shareholders, investors, and other stakeholders who must navigate dense data and regulatory requirements. Traditional annual reports often buried important information in cluttered pages, dense with tables, charts, and small text. Minimalist approaches reorganize this information hierarchically, using white space to separate sections, clear typography to distinguish different types of content, and simplified charts that highlight key trends rather than displaying every data point. The reports become tools for understanding rather than obstacles to comprehension. Clean layouts don't hide complexity, but rather organize it, making the essential information discoverable and the supporting details available for those who need deeper investigation. Designer Dieter Rams articulates his philosophy during his long career at Braun, coining the phrase less but better, and developing 10 principles for good design that influence generations of minimalist practitioners. His principles emphasize innovation, usefulness, aesthetic quality, understandability, honesty, unobtrusiveness, longevity, thoroughness, environmental friendliness, and minimal design. These aren't merely aesthetic preferences, but ethical positions about design's responsibility to users and to the world. Rams demonstrates through decades of product design that restraint and simplicity serve both beauty and function, that removing unnecessary elements creates better experiences, that good design can be nearly invisible, so well integrated into life that it goes unnoticed while quietly improving everything it touches. His influence extends far beyond product design into graphic design, interface design, and contemporary minimalist thinking across disciplines. Email design simplifies dramatically in minimalist hands, improving deliverability and readability across the fractured landscape of devices and email clients that render HTML and CSS inconsistently. Complex email designs with multiple columns, intricate layouts, and elaborate styling often break when opened in different email programs or on different devices. Minimalist email design uses single-column layouts, simple typography, limited color palettes, and generous spacing choices that ensure the message displays correctly, whether opened on a phone, tablet, or desktop computer, whether viewed in Gmail, Outlook, Apple Mail, or any other client. The simplicity serves reliability, ensuring the message reaches recipients in readable form rather than as a jumbled mess of misaligned elements. Generous padding surrounds digital elements in minimalist interfaces, giving buttons, cards, and text blocks space to exist without collision or crowding. This padding the empty space between an element's content and its edges creates breathing room that improves usability and visual clarity. Touch targets grow larger with adequate padding, making buttons easier to tap on mobile devices. Text becomes more legible when surrounded by space rather than cramped against borders. The overall interface feels less dense, less demanding, more inviting. This spatial generosity costs nothing in physical materials, unlike print design where white space means unused paper, but delivers significant improvements in user experience and visual quality. Branding in the minimalist mode relies on strong typography rather than illustrative logo marks, trusting letterforms themselves to carry identity and recognition. Company names set in distinctive typefaces become the logos, sometimes with subtle modifications to letter spacing or proportions, but essentially typographic rather than symbolic. This approach creates flexible identities that scale perfectly, reproduce cleanly in any size or medium, and remain legible even when reduced to tiny sizes. The typography-focused identity also ages well, avoiding illustrative trends that quickly date. Companies like FedEx, NASA, and IBM demonstrate how powerful pure typographic identities can be, their word marks becoming as recognizable as any symbolic logo through consistent application and distinctive typographic treatment. Breathing room enters the design vocabulary during this period, a phrase describing space around elements that prevents visual crowding and allows each element to be fully perceived and understood. The metaphor suggests that designs, like people, need space to breathe, to exist comfortably, to function properly. Crowded designs feel suffocating, overwhelming, anxiety-inducing. Designs with breathing room feel calm, considered, respectful of the viewer's attention and cognitive capacity. The concept applies at every scale: space around individual letters, space around words and lines, space around paragraphs and images, space around entire compositions within their formats. At each level, adequate breathing room improves legibility, comprehension, and aesthetic pleasure. These minimalist principles find their way into design education programs worldwide, taught as fundamental skills that students must master before exploring more complex approaches. Design schools recognize that understanding restraint, hierarchy, proportion, and spatial relationships provides essential foundation for all subsequent work. Students learn to solve problems with limited means, to make every element count, to understand why something belongs in a composition or why it should be removed. This educational emphasis ensures that minimalist thinking influences even designers who don't ultimately work in minimalist styles, shaping how they approach problems and evaluate solutions regardless of aesthetic direction. In 2016, Instagram redesigns its logo, the change exemplifying a broader trend towards simplified, flat brand identities in the digital age. The original logo depicted a detailed camera with rainbow stripe, a skeuomorphic design referencing analog photography. The new logo reduces to a simple camera outline with a gradient background, minimal, flat, easily recognizable even at tiny sizes on crowded phone screens. The redesign sparks controversy among users attached to the original, but the new logo proves more functional in contemporary contexts, working better as an app icon, scaling more effectively, and aligning with modern aesthetic sensibilities. The change reflects Instagram's evolution from photo-sharing novelty to essential communication platform, requiring an identity that feels current and sophisticated rather than nostalgic and playful. This minimalist simplicity improves accessibility for people with visual impairments, a crucial consideration often overlooked in more decorative design approaches. High contrast between text and background ensures readability for those with reduced vision. Simple layouts without complex nested structures work better with screen readers that translate visual information into audio for blind users. Clear typography without decorative flourishes remains legible even when significantly enlarged. Generous spacing prevents elements from blurring together for those with focusing difficulties. The functional clarity that makes minimalist design aesthetically appealing also makes it more universally usable, serving audiences with varying abilities and needs. Good minimalist design isn't just beautiful, it's inclusive, recognizing that clarity benefits everyone. Repetition creates rhythm in minimalist design without adding new elements, the same forms appearing in different contexts to build consistency and visual coherence across compositions. A circular shape might appear as a decorative element, as a container for text, as a button, as a logo element. Its repetition throughout creates unity. A specific shade of blue might color headlines, accent graphic elements, and highlight interactive components. Its recurrence builds recognition and establishes visual language. This principle of repetition allows minimalist designs to feel varied and dynamic. Despite their limited palette of elements, the same basic components combining and recombining to create different effects and serve different purposes while maintaining overall cohesion. The evolution of these principles from accessibility, considerations, to educational emphasis, to cultural shifts in visual communication demonstrates how minimalism transcends mere aesthetic preference to become a comprehensive approach addressing practical, ethical, and experiential concerns simultaneously. The movement proves adaptive, absorbing new requirements and technologies while maintaining its core commitment to clarity, restraint, and purposeful design. Each development reinforces others, creating a robust framework applicable across an ever-expanding range of contexts and challenges. Typography and touch. Typography in minimalist design often features increased letter spacing tracking in typographic terminology, creating a more open, airy feel that distinguishes contemporary minimalism from its denser historical precedents. Where traditional typography often sets letters relatively close together for efficient use of space, minimalist typography allows letters to breathe, spacing them generously to create rhythm and elegance. This expanded tracking works particularly well with uppercase text, preventing letters from feeling cramped or colliding visually. The technique also improves readability at certain sizes and creates a more relaxed, contemporary feel. Words become less dense objects and more open patterns. The space between letters as important as the letters themselves in creating the overall visual impression. The mobile first design approach naturally leads to minimalist solutions, a philosophy that begins the design process with the smallest, most constrained screen and expands outward rather than starting with desktop and shrinking down. When designers begin with mobile, they must prioritize ruthlessly. There's simply no room for non-essential elements on a small phone screen. This constraint forces clarity about what truly matters, what information users absolutely need, what actions they must be able to perform. The resulting designs tend towards simplicity not by choice, but by necessity. And this simplicity often improves the experience even when scaled up to larger screens. Mobile-first thinking eliminates the excess that might survive in desktop-first approaches, creating leaner, more focused experiences across all devices. Minimalist design often employs thin line weights in both typography and graphic elements, a choice that creates delicacy and refinement while maintaining clarity. Hairline rules separate sections almost invisibly. Outline typography appears elegant and modern. Icons render as simple line drawings rather than filled shapes. These thin weights work particularly well on high-resolution screens, where fine details reproduce crisply, though they require careful consideration for print applications where very thin lines might not reproduce reliably. The thinness suggests precision, care, attention to detail, nothing heavy-handed or crude intrudes. Everything feels carefully considered, deliberately rendered at the minimum weight necessary to remain visible and functional. The elimination of traditional editorial embellishments characterizes minimalist publications. No drop caps beginning paragraphs, no heavily styled pull quotes, no decorative rules or ornamental dividers. Text flows in clean columns without interruption or decoration. Quotations integrate into the text rather than breaking out into special treatments. Chapter openings might feature nothing more than a number or title in the same typeface used throughout, perhaps larger but not fundamentally different. This restraint places faith in the content itself, trusting that good writing doesn't need typographic fireworks to engage readers. The design becomes transparent, a vessel for content rather than a competing attraction. Minimalist presentation design reduces bullet points and increases visual impact through carefully chosen imagery and large, bold typography. Traditional presentation slides often cram multiple bullet points of text onto each slide, requiring presenters to read information audiences can see for themselves. Minimalist presentations show one idea per slide, perhaps a single image, a brief headline, a key number displayed large and dramatic. This approach forces presenters to speak more extemporaneously, to explain and expand rather than reading text. It also keeps audiences engaged with the speaker rather than distracted by dense slides. The visual simplicity focuses attention, making each slide memorable and each transition meaningful. The principle of proximity in minimalist design groups related elements together through spacing rather than through borders, backgrounds, or other explicit containers. Items that belong together sit close to each other, items in different categories separate with white space. The viewer unconsciously understands these relationships without needing visual containers to make them explicit. A name and phone numbers sitting close together clearly relate to each other. A gap of white space signals the next person's information. This spatial organization feels more sophisticated than boxing each group in borders or alternating background colors, trusting viewers to perceive relationships through the fundamental design principle of proximity. Things near each other are understood to be related. Minimalist design reduces printing costs by using fewer colors and simpler production techniques, an economic advantage that aligns conveniently with aesthetic preferences. A design using only black ink costs less to print than one requiring multiple color passes. Simple layouts without bleeds or complex die cuts reduce setup costs and waste. Paper choices can focus on quality rather than needing special coatings or treatments to support complex designs. These cost savings make minimalism particularly attractive for small businesses, nonprofits, and other organizations with limited budgets. The aesthetic of restraint becomes economically practical, proving that beautiful design needn't be expensive design. The ghost button trend in web design emerges from minimalist aesthetics. Buttons defined only by outline borders rather than filled backgrounds, barely there yet perfectly functional. These buttons feel lighter, less insistent than solid buttons, creating a more refined interface aesthetic. They work particularly well for secondary actions, where visual weight needs to be reduced compared to primary buttons. The transparency allows background images or colors to show through, making ghost buttons adaptable to various contexts. The trend demonstrates minimalism's influence on interactive design, where even functional elements like buttons can be stripped to their essential characteristics while remaining usable and understandable. Minimalist design improves load times for digital products by requiring fewer assets and resources, fewer images to download, simpler code to execute, cleaner markup with less complexity. A minimalist website with limited imagery, simple layouts, and clean code loads quickly, even on slower connections. The performance advantage becomes particularly important for mobile users on cellular networks, where connection speeds and data costs matter significantly. Fast-loading sites improve user experience, reduce bounce rates, and perform better in search engine rankings that favor speed. Once again, aesthetic choices align with practical advantages, minimalism serving both beauty and function simultaneously. The use of all-caps typography is common in minimalist design, creating strong horizontal lines and graphic impact through letter forms alone. Uppercase text forms clean rectangles, every letter the same height, creating solid bands of typography that function almost as graphic elements. This treatment works well for headlines, labels, and short text blocks where readability of long passages isn't a concern. The all-caps treatment feels bold, confident, modern characteristics that align well with minimalist sensibilities. Combined with generous letter spacing, all-caps typography becomes elegant rather than aggressive, its uniformity creating visual calm and strong geometric structure within compositions. These various technical and aesthetic considerations, from typography treatments to performance optimization, from economic advantages to interface patterns, illustrate how minimalism operates simultaneously at multiple levels. The approach addresses visual aesthetics while solving practical problems, reduces costs while improving experiences, creates beauty while enhancing function. This multifaceted utility explains minimalism's enduring relevance across changing technologies and evolving cultural contexts. Each new challenge, finding solutions within minimalism's fundamental commitment to clarity, restraint, and purposeful design that serves users above all other considerations. Pattern and presence. The card design pattern in user interface and user experience design emerges from minimalist principles, organizing information in discrete modules that contain related content cleanly and can be rearranged or reorganized as needed. Each card functions as a self-contained unit with defined boundaries, typically featuring rounded corners and subtle shadows in some implementations, or simple borders and white space in flatter approaches. Cards can display a wide variety of content product information, article previews, user profiles, media galleries, while maintaining consistent structure. The pattern scales beautifully across devices, cards stacking vertically on narrow mobile screens and arranging in grids on wider displays. This modular organization reflects minimalist thinking at a structural level, breaking complex interfaces into manageable, understandable chunks. Exhibition design embraces minimalist principles with sparse installations that allow individual works to breathe and command full attention without competition from neighboring pieces or decorative environments. Rather than hanging paintings close together in salon-style arrangements or filling galleries with interpretive materials and contextual objects, minimalist exhibition design gives each work generous space. White walls, ample distance between pieces, minimal labeling, restrained lighting, these choices place focus entirely on the artworks themselves. Viewers can contemplate each piece without distraction, without visual noise pulling attention away. The gallery becomes a neutral container, a quiet space where art exists on its own terms rather than within elaborate staging or thematic environments. The principle of scale creates drama in minimalist design through size contrasts between the few elements present, relationships, of large to small, becoming powerful when limited elements allow such relationships to stand out clearly. A single word might fill an entire page, while a small line of text anchors the bottom corner, The extreme scale difference creates visual tension and hierarchy without requiring additional elements. A tiny logo balances against a massive photograph. A small block of text relates to an enormous area of white space. These scale relationships feel bold, confident, unexpected. Where complex designs might use many medium-sized elements, minimalist designs use dramatic size differences between fewer elements to create impact and guide attention. Minimalist design communicates sophistication in fashion and luxury brand contexts through elegant restraint that suggests confidence, quality, and refinement. Luxury brands often adopt minimalist aesthetics, simple word marks, monochromatic packaging, clean layouts with generous white space, understanding that restraint signals exclusivity more effectively than excess. The approach suggests that the product's quality speaks for itself, requiring no elaborate visual claims or marketing hyperbole. Brands like Chanel, Prada, and Calvin Klein demonstrate how minimalism conveys prestige, their advertising and packaging achieving maximum impact through minimum means. The aesthetic becomes associated with high-end goods, making minimalist design choices attractive to any brand seeking to position itself as premium or sophisticated. The use of centered alignment is common in minimalist design for creating formal, balanced compositions that feel stable, symmetrical, and considered. Text centers on the page or screen. Images center within their spaces. Elements stack vertically along a central axis. This symmetry creates calm and order, though it can feel static if not balanced with other visual elements or asymmetrical compositions elsewhere. Centered alignment works particularly well for formal occasions, wedding invitations, certificates, memorial materials, where balance and dignity matter more than dynamic energy. The approach also serves well for short pieces of text, like headlines or quotes, where the centered mass creates a pleasing shape on the page. Minimalist wayfinding and signage systems improve navigation through clear, simple, directional information that strips away confusion and presents only what's needed to move confidently from one place to another. Airport signage, hospital wayfinding, public transit systems all benefit from minimalist approaches that prioritize immediate comprehension over elaborate branding or decorative treatments. Icons reduce complex ideas to simple symbols. Typography remains large and legible. Color coding creates instant understanding of different zones or services. Arrows point clearly in appropriate directions. The systems recognize that people consulting wayfinding information are often stressed, rushed, or unfamiliar with the environment, requiring solutions that communicate instantly without requiring sustained attention or interpretation. The above-the-fold area in minimalist web design, the portion visible without scrolling when a page first loads, typically contains one clear call to action rather than multiple competing elements demanding attention simultaneously. This single focus acknowledges that human attention is limited and that presenting too many options often results in decision paralysis rather than engagement. A hero image or headline, a brief value proposition, and one prominent button or link these elements invite immediate understanding and action. Additional information, secondary actions, and supporting content appear further down the page for users who scroll, but the initial view remains uncluttered and focused. This approach serves both aesthetics and conversion, creating pages that look clean while guiding users toward desired actions. Startup culture adopts minimalist principles enthusiastically, creating clean, modern brand identities on limited budgets while signaling innovation and forward-thinking values. New companies often lack resources for elaborate branding campaigns or complex visual systems, making minimalism's simplicity practically advantageous. But the aesthetic choice also carries cultural meaning. Minimalist design feels contemporary, tech-savvy, innovative. It suggests the company focuses on substance rather than superficial flash, on building great products rather than elaborate marketing. Silicon Valley companies particularly embrace this aesthetic, creating a visual language associated with disruption, efficiency, and technological progress. The style becomes self-reinforcing. Startups adopt minimalism, partly because other successful startups have adopted it, creating a recognizable visual culture around entrepreneurship and innovation. The elimination of skeuomorphism design elements, mimicking real-world textures and objects, marks a significant shift toward minimalism in digital design during the early 2010 seconds. Earlier, digital interfaces often featured realistic textures, leather stitching on calendar apps, wood grain on bookshelf interfaces, glossy highlights suggesting physical depth on buttons. These skeuomorphic elements helped users understand digital interfaces by referencing familiar physical objects, but they also added visual complexity and felt increasingly outdated as users became more comfortable with digital tools. The move away from skeuomorphism toward flat, minimalist design represented a maturing of digital aesthetics, interfaces becoming confident in their own language rather than borrowing metaphors from the physical world. Buttons could look like buttons without pretending to be physical objects. Interfaces could be intuitive without mimicking real materials. Minimalist design employs mathematical ratios for sizing typography, creating proportional harmony through systems like the modular scale that generates related text sizes based on consistent ratios. Rather than arbitrarily choosing font sizes, say 16 pixels for body text, 24 for subheads, 32 for headlines. Designers using modular scales calculate sizes based on ratios like the golden ratio, 1.618, or perfect fourth, 1.333. Starting from a base size, each subsequent size multiplies by the ratio, creating a series of related numbers that feel harmonious together. This mathematical approach creates visual rhythm and ensures all typography relates proportionally, no size feeling arbitrary or disconnected from others. The system reflects minimalist values of thoughtful precision and underlying order, even when that order remains invisible to viewers who simply experience the harmonious results. The convergence of these applications, from interface patterns to exhibition design, from luxury branding to mathematical systems, reveals minimalism's remarkable versatility and adaptability. The core principles remain consistent across wildly different contexts, yet each application discovers unique expressions appropriate to its specific needs and constraints. Minimalism proves itself not as a rigid formula, but as a flexible framework, guiding decisions while allowing for creativity, serving function while enabling beauty, maintaining coherence while encouraging variation within clearly defined parameters that paradoxically enable rather than restrict meaningful design innovation. Consistency and culture. The principle of consistency in minimalist design means repeating the same limited set of styles throughout a project, building recognition and coherence through deliberate repetition rather than through variety. A single typeface family serves all needs, perhaps, using different weights for hierarchy, but never jumping between unrelated fonts. A palette of 2 or 3 colors appears consistently across all applications. Spacing follows a systematic scale, margins maintaining predictable relationships throughout. This consistency creates unity, ensures recognition, and simplifies decision-making for both designers and viewers. Once the system establishes itself, every subsequent application reinforces it, each new piece feeling immediately related to everything that came before. The approach trades variety for clarity, novelty for reliability, achieving strength through focused repetition. Technology companies standardize on minimalist annual reports during the late 20th and early 21st centuries, presenting complex data and forward-looking statements through clear layouts that prioritize comprehension over embellishment. Companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft produce annual reports that look more like art books than traditional corporate documents. Clean typography, generous white space, striking photography, simplified infographics. The aesthetic choices reflect these companies' brands and values while serving the practical purpose of making financial information accessible to shareholders who may not have accounting expertise. The reports become showcases for minimalist design principles applied to traditionally dense, complex documents, demonstrating that even the most information-heavy materials benefit from thoughtful reduction and clear organization. Pull quotes in minimalist editorial design appear rarely, and when they do appear, they use the same typeface as body text, distinguishing themselves only through larger size rather than through different fonts, colors, or decorative treatments. This restraint maintains visual consistency while still providing the emphasis and break-in rhythm that pull quotes offer. The quote might appear significantly larger than body text, perhaps spanning multiple columns, but it remains part of the same typographic family. Sometimes additional letter spacing or weight changes provide subtle differentiation, but the overall effect stays quiet, integrated, part of the continuous flow rather than a jarring interruption. The approach trusts that good quotes command attention through their content rather than requiring typographic fireworks to announce their importance. Cultural specificity reveals itself in different interpretations of minimalism. Western, Eastern, and Scandinavian approaches each bringing unique sensibilities to shared principles of simplicity and restraint. Western minimalism often emphasizes geometric precision, high contrast, and bold statements. Think Swiss typography or American corporate modernism. Eastern minimalism, influenced by Zen philosophy and traditional aesthetics, tends toward more organic forms, subtle gradations, and philosophical depth, the space between elements carrying as much meaning as the elements themselves. Scandinavian minimalism balances between these, incorporating warmth, natural materials, and humanistic values alongside clean lines and functional clarity. These cultural variations demonstrate that minimalism isn't a single monolithic style, but a set of principles that different cultures interpret through their own values and aesthetic traditions. The principle of intention becomes paramount in minimalist design. Every element must have a deliberate reason for inclusion, must justify its presence through clear purpose or meaningful contribution. This intentionality requires designers to interrogate their choices constantly. Why this typeface? Why this size? Why this color? Why this position? If satisfying answers emerge, the element stays. If not, it goes. This process of questioning and justification ensures nothing accidental or arbitrary remains, that every aspect of the design reflects conscious decision-making. The resulting work feels considered purposeful, honest qualities that viewers perceive, even if they can't articulate why the design feels different from less intentional work. The evolution of minimalism continues into contemporary practice, designers finding new ways to express simplicity while maintaining visual interest and emotional resonance that keeps designs from feeling cold or impersonal. Contemporary minimalism often incorporates subtle animations in digital contexts, adding life without adding clutter. It embraces bold photography that provides emotional impact within minimalist frameworks. It experiments with unexpected scale relationships, surprising color choices within limited palettes, innovative typography treatments that push boundaries while respecting legibility. This evolution demonstrates minimalism's vitality. It's not a historical style frozen in time, but a living practice that adapts to new technologies, new cultural contexts, new design challenges while maintaining its core commitment to clarity and restraint. Card designs organize digital content throughout contemporary interfaces, each piece of information contained, defined, yet part of larger systems that can reorganize dynamically based on user preferences or contextual needs. Social media feeds present content in cards. News apps display articles as cards. E-commerce sites show products in card layouts. The pattern succeeds because it provides flexibility. Cards can reorder, filter, expand, collapse while maintaining consistency. Each card follows similar structure even as content varies, creating predictable patterns that users understand intuitively. The approach reflects minimalist thinking about modular systems, about creating coherent experiences through repeated application of simple rules rather than through elaborate custom treatments for every piece of content. Exhibition spaces embrace emptiness in minimalist curation, understanding that silence amplifies rather than diminishes the works displayed within carefully considered environments. The emptiness isn't absence, but presence. The space itself becomes part of the experience, allowing viewers to contemplate, to move freely, to experience art without competing for attention among crowded walls or elaborate staging. Light falls cleanly on white walls. Floors remain uncluttered. Benches provide rest without decorative distraction. The gallery trusts that art needs nothing more than space and light and silence to communicate fully. This approach honors both artwork and viewer, creating conditions for genuine engagement rather than overwhelming with spectacle or contextual information that mediates rather than facilitates direct experience. Scale relationships create hierarchy without adding complexity in minimalist compositions. A single large element immediately establishing primary focus, while smaller elements provide supporting information or secondary entry points. A massive headline dominates, while small body text waits below. An enormous photograph commands attention, while a tiny logo anchors the corner. These dramatic scale differences communicate instantly. Viewers know immediately what matters most, what to look at first, how to navigate the visual field. The technique requires confidence. Designers must trust that extreme contrasts will work, that viewers will understand the relationships, that less can indeed be more when size differences compensate for lack of elements. Luxury brands understand that restraint signals value more effectively than excess, a counterintuitive principle that minimalist design demonstrates consistently across fashion, cosmetics, jewelry, automobiles, and other premium product categories. The plain white bag from a high-end retailer communicates more than an elaborately decorated one from a discount store. The simple wordmark signals confidence in brand recognition. The unadorned packaging suggests quality needs no elaborate presentation. This association between minimalism and luxury creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Minimalist design looks expensive because expensive brands use it, and expensive brands use it because it looks expensive. The aesthetic becomes a visual shorthand for quality, exclusivity, sophistication, appealing to consumers seeking not just products but the cultural meanings those products convey. These contemporary applications and cultural interpretations, from intentionality to luxury associations, from card-based systems to exhibition philosophy, demonstrate minimalism's continued relevance and evolution. The principles established decades ago remain vital, but their applications expand and adapt to serve new needs, new technologies, new cultural contexts. Minimalism proves itself not as a dated historical style, but as an enduring approach to design thinking that remains as relevant to contemporary challenges as it was to the problems it originally addressed, perhaps even more so in an increasingly complex, cluttered, attention-scarce world. Intention and evolution. The above-the-fold area in minimalist web design typically contains one clear call to action rather than multiple competing elements, recognizing that decision paralysis often results from too many simultaneous choices rather than from too few. When users arrive at a page and encounter 5 different buttons, 3 navigation menus, multiple headlines competing for attention, and various promotional messages, they often choose nothing, overwhelmed by options. Minimalist approaches present a single primary action: start free trial, learn more, shop now, making the next step obvious and reducing cognitive load. Secondary options exist further down the page for users who need them, but the initial experience remains focused and clear. This hierarchy serves both user experience and business goals, guiding visitors toward desired actions without forcing those actions or eliminating alternatives entirely. Startup culture adopts minimalist principles, not just for aesthetic reasons, but because limited resources make elaborate branding impractical. Yet the resulting aesthetic becomes associated with innovation and disruption regardless of budget constraints. A new company might choose minimalism because they can't afford complex logo design, elaborate packaging, or multicolor printing. But the clean aesthetic signals something beyond affordability. It suggests focus on product rather than marketing, substance over style, function over form. The association becomes so strong that even well-funded startups often choose minimalist design to signal their identification with startup culture and values. The aesthetic becomes almost uniform in certain industries: software, direct-to-consumer brands, technology services, creating a recognizable visual language that speaks to particular audiences and cultural moments. The elimination of skeuomorphism marks a watershed moment in digital design during the early 2010 seconds. Interfaces finally confident enough in their own language to stop mimicking physical objects and materials. The shift happens gradually. Then, suddenly, Apple's iOS 7 redesign in 2013, perhaps the most visible turning point. But similar movements occur across the industry. Realistic textures disappear, shadows flatten, gradients simplify or vanish entirely. The change feels dramatic to users accustomed to leather textures and glossy buttons, but designers recognize it as a natural evolution, digital design maturing beyond its need for real-world metaphors. The flat, minimalist aesthetic that replaces skeuomorphism feels more honest, acknowledging that screens are flat surfaces rather than windows into three-dimensional spaces, that digital buttons needn't pretend to be physical objects to remain usable and understandable. Minimalist design often uses mathematical ratios for sizing typography. Systems like the modular scale, creating relationships between text sizes that feel harmonious even when viewers can't identify why. These systems aren't arbitrary, but based on proportions that appear throughout nature and classical art: the golden ratio, musical intervals, geometric progressions. Starting from a base text size, each larger size results from multiplying by a consistent ratio, creating a scale where every size relates mathematically to every other. Body text at 16 pixels might grow to 21.3 pixels for small headings, 28.4 pixels for medium headings, 37.9 pixels for large headings, numbers that seem random but derive from consistent mathematical relationships. The resulting hierarchy feels natural, balanced, right, even though most viewers never consciously notice the underlying mathematics that creates this feeling. The principle of consistency extends beyond visual elements to behavioral patterns in digital interfaces. Buttons that look similar behave similarly. Gestures work the same way throughout an application. Navigation patterns remain predictable. This consistency reduces learning curves, prevents errors, and creates confidence that the interface will behave as expected. Minimalist design supports this behavioral consistency through visual consistency. When elements look the same, their similar behavior feels natural and expected. The relationship works both ways. Consistent behavior justifies consistent appearance, and consistent appearance signals consistent behavior. The result is interfaces that feel learnable, predictable, trustworthy, qualities that improve user experience more than any amount of visual decoration could achieve. Technology companies' adoption of minimalist annual reports reflects not just aesthetic preference, but recognition that clarity serves communication better than complexity, particularly when explaining technology and forward-looking strategy to diverse audiences. Shareholders include institutional investors, individual retail investors, financial analysts, employees, and media audiences with varying levels of technical and financial expertise. Minimalist presentation helps all these audiences find relevant information, understand key metrics, and grasp strategic direction without requiring specialized knowledge to decode overly complex presentations. The reports demonstrate that design isn't decoration but communication, that visual choices directly impact comprehension and engagement, that clarity serves business purposes as much as aesthetic ones. Pull quotes: "In minimalist editorial design, maintain typographic consistency, distinguishing themselves through scale and position rather than through contrasting fonts or decorative treatments that would disrupt visual flow." A quote might span 2 columns while body text flows in single columns. It might appear centered while body text aligns left. It might use a heavier font weight within the same type family. These subtle distinctions provide emphasis without creating jarring contrasts or breaking the overall typographic system. The approach requires confidence that content and context provide sufficient emphasis, that quotes need not shout to be noticed, that readers will recognize and appreciate meaningful excerpts even when typographic treatment remains quiet and integrated rather than attention-seeking and disruptive. Cultural variations in minimalism demonstrate that simplicity isn't universal but culturally specific, different traditions bringing different values and assumptions to what might seem like straightforward principles of reduction and clarity. Japanese Ma embraces negative space as positive element, emptiness as presence, silence as communication. Scandinavian minimalism incorporates warmth through natural materials and humanistic values. Swiss minimalism emphasizes precision, mathematical rigor, and systematic thinking. American minimalism often focuses on bold statements and commercial applications. These variations aren't contradictions, but different expressions of shared commitment to intentionality, restraint, and respect for both content and audience. The cultural specificity enriches minimalism, proving it flexible enough to adapt across contexts while maintaining core principles. Intention drives every decision in minimalist practice. Each element present because it serves clear purpose, each absence resulting from deliberate choice rather than oversight or laziness. This intentionality requires more work, not less. Designers must justify every choice, consider every alternative, understand every element's contribution to the whole. The process eliminates the accidental, the habitual, the merely conventional. What remains reflects conscious decision-making at every level, from overall strategy to smallest detail. This intentionality communicates itself to viewers even when they can't articulate what makes a design feel different. They sense the consideration, the thoughtfulness, the care embedded in every aspect of the work. Thank you for stopping by. If you're still awake, check out my channel.